A single piece of paper can be the difference between a massive tip and a bloodbath. When 24-year-old waitress Marlo Hale handed a receipt to Chicago's most feared man, she didn't just circle her tip. She circled the words, "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now." What followed changed everything. The Aldridge Chop House on Rush Street was the kind of establishment where Chicago's elite went to chew on $80 dry-aged ribeyes and pretend they owned the city. It smelled of truffle butter, expensive cigar smoke lingering from the patio, and old money. For Marlo Hale, it was just a place to wear a stiff white button-down, smile until her cheeks ached, and chip away at the crushing medical debt her mother had left behind. It was a rainy Tuesday night in November, the kind of evening where the restaurant was only half full, bathed in the dim, golden glow of brass chandeliers. Marlo was working Section 4, the secluded booths in the back, typically reserved for politicians, celebrities, or men who didn't want their faces caught in the street-facing windows. Tonight, booth 42 was occupied by Alessio Moro. Everyone in the service industry downtown knew who Alessio Moro was, even if the Chicago Tribune only ever referred to him as a prominent logistics entrepreneur. At 32, Alessio was the undisputed head of the Moro syndicate. He possessed a terrifying stillness, a sharp, dark-haired man who wore bespoke charcoal suits and a vintage watch that cost more than Marlo's life insurance policy. He didn't bark orders or treat the staff like servants. He was meticulously polite, tipped a staggering 100%, always in crisp, uncreased hundreds. But tonight, the air around Alessio's table was thick with a suffocating tension. He was dining with Vincent Salerno, a notorious capo from the rival Salerno family. Vincent was a stark contrast to Alessio, sweaty, boisterous, wearing too much cologne, constantly glancing at his phone. They were supposedly negotiating a truce over the Southside shipping routes. But Marlo, whose older brother Eli had once run illegal sports bets for a small-time crew, knew the subtle language of the streets. She recognized the signs of a bad deal. Vincent was overcompensating, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and he hadn't touched his $400 bottle of wine. At 10:15 p.m., the heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant swung open. A man stepped inside, shaking off a soaked trench coat. Marlo was standing by the POS terminal, punching in an order for a side of creamed spinach, when she noticed him. The newcomer didn't wait for the hostess. He bypassed the dining room entirely and took a seat at the far end of the mahogany bar, ordering a club soda. He kept his leather gloves on. More importantly, Marlo noticed his eyes. He wasn't watching the bartender. He was staring dead into the massive antique mirror behind the bar. A mirror that offered a perfect, unobstructed reflection of booth 42, where Alessio sat with his back to the room. Marlo felt a cold prickle of dread wash over the back of her neck. She watched as Vincent subtly tapped his water glass twice. In the mirror, the man in the trench coat reached slowly into his coat pocket. It was a setup. Vincent had lured Alessio out of his heavily guarded stronghold into neutral territory. The truce was a lie. If that man pulled a trigger, Alessio Moro would be dead before his stake arrived. But Marlo's mind raced past Alessio to the immediate collateral damage. If bullets started flying in the enclosed dining room, the ensuing crossfire would be a massacre. Waiters, bartenders, innocent diners, they would all be caught in the meat grinder. She couldn't just stand there. And deep down, despite who Alessio was, she remembered the night a drunken patron had grabbed her waist. And Alessio had quietly stepped in, giving the man a look so chilling the patron practically ran out of the restaurant. Alessio was a monster, perhaps, but he was a monster with a code. Vincent suddenly stood up, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Excuse me for a second, Alessio. Need to use the men's room. Order us another bottle, will you?" It was the oldest trick in the book. The hit was going down the second Vincent was clear of the blast zone. Marlo's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had exactly 30 seconds. She rushed back to the terminal, her hand shaking so badly she misjudged her passcode twice. Finally, she logged in and printed Alessio's check. She grabbed a thick red Sharpie from the server station. On the back of the itemized receipt, she wrote 3 desperate, frantic sentences. She pressed so hard the red ink bled through the thermal paper. "Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now." She drew a heavy, frantic circle around the words, shoved the receipt into the sleek black leather check presenter, and took a deep breath, forcing her trembling hands to steady. She pasted on her best, oblivious customer service smile and walked toward booth 42. The man at the bar was completely turned around now, the club soda ignored. His right hand was fully inside his coat, and he was sliding off his stool, taking a slow step toward the dining room floor. Marlowe reached the table. Alessio was casually checking his watch, his face impassive. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Morrow," Marlowe said, her voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Your driver called the front desk. He asked me to give this to you immediately." Alessio's dark eyes flicked up to hers. His brow furrowed just a fraction. He knew his driver, Dario, would never call the front desk. Dario had a direct line to his earpiece. Marlowe didn't wait for him to question her. She placed the black leather book on the table, leaned in just an inch, and firmly tapped her index finger against the leather cover twice. The eye contact she held with him wasn't the polite, deferential gaze of a waitress. It was a screaming, desperate warning. Alessio didn't say a word. He flipped the leather book open, his eyes locking onto the aggressive red ink, the heavy circles around the words gunman, deal, and exit. For one agonizing second, time in the Aldridge Chop House stood completely still. Alessio Morrow did not gasp. He did not look over his shoulder. He did not give the hitman a single microscopic tell that the ambush had been compromised. Instead, he looked calmly up at Marlowe, his dark eyes turning into shards of black ice. "Thank you, Marlowe," he murmured, his voice a low gravel hum that sent a shiver down her spine. "Get down." Before Marlowe's brain could even process the command, all hell broke loose. Alessio's right hand shot beneath his tailored jacket while his left hand gripped the edge of the massive oak dining table. With a sudden, explosive surge of brute strength, he kicked upward and flipped the table. Plate shattered, silverware clattered, and the half-empty wine bottle exploded in a spray of deep red that looked terrifyingly like blood. The muffled mechanical spits of a suppressed 9mm handgun ripped through the air. The leather upholstery of the booth, where Alessio's chest had been a millisecond prior, ruptured, spitting cotton and foam into the air. Screams erupted across the restaurant. Diners dove under tables. The elegant, sophisticated hum of the Aldridge instantly dissolved into pure, primal chaos. Marlowe shrieked, dropping to her knees behind the heavy wooden pillar of the server station, covering her head, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps as glass rained down around her. From behind the overturned table, Alessio returned fire. The deafening crack of his silenced pistol echoed like a cannon in the dining room. One shot, two shots. A heavy thud told Marlowe the gunman from the bar had gone down. But the nightmare wasn't over. The front doors of the restaurant burst open. 3 more men in heavy coats flooded in. Vincent's backup crew. They didn't care about collateral damage. They raised automatic weapons, and the dining room became a war zone. Wood splintered, chandeliers shattered. Drywall dusted the air like snow. Suddenly, a strong, unyielding hand clamped onto Marlowe's wrist. She screamed, kicking out, but she was hauled violently to her feet. It was Alessio. His bespoke suit was covered in white drywall dust, and a thin line of blood trickled down his cheek where a piece of flying crystal had grazed him. But his eyes were terrifyingly focused. "Move!" he roared over the gunfire. He didn't give her a choice. Pulling her with enough force to nearly dislocate her shoulder, he dragged her away from the service station just as a volley of bullets shredded the wooden pillar she had been hiding behind. They sprinted toward the kitchen doors. Alessio fired blindly over his shoulder, suppressing the advancing hitmen just long enough to kick the silver double doors open. They burst into the kitchen, a stark contrast of gleaming stainless steel and blinding white fluorescent light. Chefs were already on the floor, hands over their heads, screaming in Spanish and English. The smell of searing beef mixed violently with the acrid stench of cordite and gun smoke. Out the back. "Keep your head down," Alessio barked, practically shoving Marlowe down the narrow aisle between the prep stations and the blazing stoves. Bullets punched through the kitchen doors behind them, pinging wildly off hanging copper pots and shattering industrial glass refrigerators. Marlowe was crying now. Tears of pure adrenaline blurring her vision, her non-slip waitress shoes sliding on a puddle of spilled olive oil. Alessio caught her before she fell, his arm wrapping around her waist like a vice, half carrying her toward the red glow of the exit sign. He kicked the heavy steel fire door open, and they spilled out into the freezing, rain-slicked alleyway of downtown Chicago. The cold air hit Marlowe like a slap to the face, but there was no time to breathe. A massive, heavily armored black Mercedes G-Wagon was idling aggressively in the alley, its headlights off. The rear door was already flung wide open. Standing beside it, laying down heavy cover fire with an assault rifle toward the mouth of the alley, was Dario, Alessio's hulking enforcer. "Get in! Get in!" Dario bellowed over the roar of the weapon. Alessio threw Marlo into the back seat and dove in right behind her. Dario slammed the heavy ballistic door shut, jumping into the driver's seat. The G-Wagon's tires shrieked against the wet asphalt, fishtailing wildly for a second before the massive engine roared, launching the vehicle out of the alley and into chaotic Chicago traffic. Inside the SUV, the silence was deafening, broken only by the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the engine and the frantic, shallow gasps of Marlo's breathing. She was pressed against the far door, trembling violently, staring at her blood-stained hands. She hadn't even realized she'd cut herself on the broken plates. The reality of what she had just done was crashing down on her like a collapsing building. She was an ordinary girl, a waitress, and she was sitting in a getaway car with the boss of the Chicago underworld. Alessio was sitting next to her, staring straight ahead. He calmly popped the empty magazine out of his pistol, letting it clatter onto the floorboard, and slid a fresh one into the grip with a sharp, mechanical click. Slowly, he turned his head to look at her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, terrifying clarity in his gaze. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipt, the red Sharpie ink glaring in the dim streetlights passing by the tinted windows. "Vincent is a paranoid man," Alessio said, his voice dangerously soft. "He wouldn't trust a random hit. He would have paid off someone on the inside to make sure the coast was clear. Someone in your restaurant tipped off those shooters when the time was right." Marlo shook her head frantically, terrified. He thought it was her. "I didn't. I swear. I just saw him at the bar, and I saw Vincent tap his glass, and my brother used to run with the Salerno guys, so I knew what it meant. I was just trying to help." Alessio held up a hand, silencing her. "I know it wasn't you, Marlo. If you wanted me dead, you wouldn't have handed me this." He tapped the receipt. Leaning in closer, the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne enveloping her. "But Vincent saw you hand me the checkbook. He saw me read it, and he saw me flip the table. He knows you warned me." Marlo's heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Alessio replied grimly, "that Vincent Salerno is humiliated. He lost 3 men tonight, and he lost his chance to take my territory. In his eyes, a 24-year-old waitress just humiliated the Salerno family." I have to go home," Marlo stammered, panic rising in her throat like bile. "My apartment. My cat is there. I have to." "If you go to your apartment tonight, you will be dead before sunrise," Alessio stated flatly, stripping away any illusion she had left. "They will burn your building to the ground just to make a point." He looked away, staring out the rain-streaked window into the darkness of the city he controlled. "Dario, take us to the lakeshore compound." "Wait, no," Marlo cried, pushing against the leather seat. "You can't just kidnap me." "I saved your life." Alessio turned back to her, and for the first time, the cold, impenetrable mask slipped just a fraction, revealing something fierce and deeply protective underneath. "You did save my life, Marlo Hale," he said softly, holding her panicked gaze. "And in my world, a life debt is the only currency that matters. You belong to me now, not as a prisoner, as my responsibility. And I promise you, as long as you are by my side, nobody from the Salerno family will ever touch a hair on your head." The G-Wagon sped into the night, carrying Marlo far away from the life she had known and plunging her violently into a dark, seductive world she could never, ever leave. The iron gates of the Lakeshore estate loomed like the entrance to a fortress, parting silently to let the battered G-Wagon slip onto the sprawling, manicured grounds. According to an unsealed affidavit from Agent Daniel Walsh of the Chicago FBI field office, who had spent a decade trying to build a RICO case against the Morrow family, this specific compound was impenetrable, equipped with military-grade surveillance, reinforced steel panic rooms, and a private security detail of former defense contractors. It was a gilded cage, and now it was Marlo's new home. For the first 3 days, Marlo lived in a state of suspended reality. She was given a master suite overlooking the churning gray waters of Lake Michigan. Her closet was miraculously stocked with designer clothes in her exact size. Her favorite boutique soaps sat in the marble bathroom, and meals prepared by a private chef were brought to her door. Yet the luxury felt suffocating. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the deafening crack of gunfire and saw the wine spraying across the pristine white tablecloth like arterial blood. Alessio gave her space, though his presence saturated the massive house. She would see him from her balcony, standing by the seawall at dawn, smoking a single cigarette while talking quietly to Dario. He moved like a shadow, commanding the sprawling criminal empire that operated beneath Chicago's glittering skyline. On the fourth night, the heavy oak door to her suite clicked open. Alessio stepped inside. He had traded his tailored suits for a dark, fitted cashmere sweater and slacks, making him look less like a corporate CEO and more like the lethal predator she knew him to be. He carried a leather medical kit and a thick manila folder. "Sit," he commanded softly, gesturing to the velvet armchair near the fireplace. Marlowe hesitated, then obeyed. Alessio knelt in front of her, opening the medical kit. He gently took her right hand, inspecting the shallow, jagged cuts on her palm from the shattered restaurant glass. She hadn't let the estate's private doctor touch her. "You've been picking at them?" he noted, his voice an intoxicating blend of reprimand and velvet. He produced a cotton swab, dipped in antiseptic. "This will sting. I can do it myself," she whispered, her pulse accelerating as his large, calloused fingers cradled her much smaller hand. "I know you can," Alessio replied, not letting go. "But you shouldn't have to. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else, Marlowe. Let someone take care of you for a change." The sheer intimacy of his touch, contrasting with the horrific violence she had watched him commit, made her breath hitch. As he meticulously bandaged her hands, the silence between them thickened, shifting from traumatic shock to a heavy, unspoken attraction. Alessio Moro was a man who took whatever he wanted, yet he treated her like something infinitely precious. "I have answers," he finally said, his tone shifting back to the icy pragmatism of a mafia boss. He reached for the manila folder and dropped it onto her lap. About the setup at the Aldridge, Marlowe's stomach tightened. She opened the folder. Inside were grainy surveillance photographs, bank statements, and a printed transcript of a burner phone wiretap. "I told you Vincent wouldn't make a move unless he had an inside man," Alessio said, standing up and pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch from a crystal decanter. "Someone to confirm my table, my security layout, and the exact moment my guard was down." Marlowe stared at the first photograph. It was taken in the shadowy booth of a dive bar on the south side. One figure was unmistakably Vincent Salerno. The other was a younger man, his shoulders hunched, handing over a padded envelope. The air left Marlowe's lungs in a violent rush. The room began to spin. "No," she choked out, dropping the photo as if it were on fire. "No, that's impossible. He's out of the game. He promised me." "Your brother Eli," Alessio stated flatly, his dark eyes fixed on her pale face. "He owed $80,000 to a Salerno sportsbook operation. Vincent offered to wipe the debt clean in exchange for the intel on my dinner meeting. Eli gave them the blueprints to the restaurant and my reservation details." Tears spilled over Marlowe's eyelashes, hot and fast. The betrayal sliced deeper than any glass. She had worked double shifts, ruined her feet, and endured harassment from customers to keep the lights on and pay off their mother's debts, all while Eli was gambling away his life and ultimately bargaining with hers. "He didn't know I would be working that section," Marlowe sobbed, burying her face in her bandaged hands. "He couldn't have known I'd be caught in the crossfire." "Ignorance is not an alibi in my world," Alessio said coldly. "He sold me to my enemies. The penalty for that is death." Marlowe shot up from the chair, her fear instantly vaporized by a surge of desperate, fierce protectiveness. She grabbed the collar of Alessio's cashmere sweater, pulling him down to her eye level. "You promised me," she hissed, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "You told me in the car that my life debt meant something. You told me I was under your protection." Alessio's hands clamped down on her hips, anchoring her to him. The proximity was electric. "You are under my protection, Marlowe." "Eli is not," she cried, her chest heaving against his. "He is my blood. If you kill him, you kill the only family I have left. Spare him, Alessio. Please, for me." Alessio stared down into her tear-filled, defiant eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. In the ruthless hierarchy of the Chicago syndicate, showing mercy to a rat was a sign of fatal weakness. It invited mutiny. But looking at the fierce, beautiful woman who had risked everything to save him, the icy fortress around Alessio's heart cracked. "Vincent has him," Alessio finally said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We intercepted chatter an hour ago. Vincent figured out your brother is the one who blew the hit. He kidnapped Eli from his apartment in Bridgeport. He's using him as bait to draw me out." Marlowe's blood ran cold. "Where?" An abandoned freight yard off the expressway, Alessio said, releasing her and turning toward the door. I'm leaving now. I'm going with you, she demanded. Alessio stopped, looking over his shoulder. Absolutely not. He's my brother, Alessio. Vincent wants to punish him because of what I did. If I don't go, I'll never forgive myself, and I will never forgive you. For a long, agonizing moment, the boss of the Chicago underworld weighed the defiance of a 24-year-old waitress. Finally, he gave a curt, stiff nod. Get your coat. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour by the time the convoy of black SUVs pulled into the rusted, decaying husk of the abandoned freight yard. Lightning cracked across the Chicago skyline, illuminating the skeletal remains of old train cars and shipping containers. It was the perfect place for a graveyard. Alessio's men fanned out silently, melting into the shadows with suppressed rifles. Alessio kept Marlowe close behind him, his body acting as a physical shield as they stepped out into the freezing mud. Moro. A voice echoed through the metal canyon. Vincent Salerno stood beneath the harsh glare of a portable halogen work light, flanked by 6 heavily armed men. Kneeling in the mud beside him, his face bruised and bleeding, was Eli. Eli! Marlowe gasped, lunging forward, but Alessio's arm shot out, catching her around the waist like an iron bar. You actually brought the girl, Vincent sneered, wiping rain from his forehead. I got to admit, Alessio, I didn't think you had a sentimental bone in your body. Turns out your weakness wears a waitress apron. Let the boy go, Vincent, Alessio said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the pounding rain. It wasn't a request. It was an executioner's final warning. This is between you and me. The Hale family is under my crest now. Vincent laughed, cocking a silver revolver and pressing the barrel directly against the back of Eli's head. Eli squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing his sister's name. Under your crest, Vincent spat. This rat gave you up for pennies, and it cost me my best crew. I'm going to blow his brains out, and then I'm going to take my time with her while you watch. Vincent, Alessio said softly, a terrifying smile curling the corner of his mouth. Look up. Vincent frowned, his eyes darting to the rusted catwalks above. A single red laser dot was painted directly on the center of his forehead. A second dot appeared on the chest of the guard to his left, then another, and another. Dario and the sniper team had flanked them in the darkness. You're surrounded by ghosts, Vincent, Alessio whispered. Drop the gun. Realization dawned on Vincent's face, twisting it into a mask of pure, desperate rage. Knowing he was a dead man, he made a split-second suicidal choice. He pulled the gun away from Eli and snapped it toward Marlowe. Alessio. Marlowe screamed. Time fractured. Alessio moved with terrifying speed, throwing his body violently over Marlowe's just as Vincent pulled the trigger. Alessio grunted as the bullet tore through the meat of his left shoulder. In the exact same millisecond, the rail yard erupted. Dario's sniper rifle cracked from the catwalk. Vincent's men dropped to the mud like cut marionettes before they could even raise their weapons. Vincent stumbled backward, his shoulder shattered by sniper fire, dropping his revolver into the dirt. Alessio didn't fall. Bleeding through his dark sweater, he pushed Marlowe safely behind a rusted steel beam. He drew his pistol, walking slowly, deliberately through the rain toward the gasping Salerno capo. Wait, Alessio, we can make a deal, Vincent pleaded, clutching his bleeding arm, crawling backward in the mud. I'll give you the docs, all of it. Alessio stood over him, an angel of death, illuminated by the lightning. You touched what is mine, he said. His voice devoid of all human emotion. He raised the weapon and fired twice into Vincent's chest, ending the Salerno threat forever. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the torrential rain. Eli was still kneeling in the mud, shaking uncontrollably. Marlowe ran to him, falling to her knees and throwing her arms around her brother. Alessio holstered his weapon, pressing a hand against his bleeding shoulder. He walked over to the siblings. Eli flinched, expecting the Mafia Boss to finish the job. You sold my life for 80 grand, Eli, Alessio said coldly, looking down at the broken man. By every law of my world, I should leave you in this mud. He paused. But your sister bought your life with her bravery. Alessio reached into his coat and tossed a thick stack of banded $100 bills into the dirt at Eli's knees. Take this. Get on a bus tonight. Leave Chicago. Leave Illinois. And never come back. If my men see your face in the city again, I won't hesitate. Understand? Eli nodded frantically, scrambling to grab the money. He looked at Marlowe, guilt and shame burning in his eyes, but she couldn't look at him anymore. The brother she knew was gone. She slowly stood up, turning her back on him, and walked toward Alessio. She reached up with trembling hands, pressing her fingers against his bleeding shoulder. "You took a bullet for me." Alessio's dark eyes softened, the ruthless monster melting away to reveal the man underneath. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping a mixture of rain and mud from her cheek. "I told you, Marlowe," he murmured, pulling her flush against his chest, right there in the rain-soaked graveyard of his enemies. "You belong to me, and a king always protects his queen." He leaned down, capturing her lips in a fierce, consuming kiss that tasted of rain, gunpowder, and an unbreakable vow. Marlowe kissed him back with equal desperation, wrapping her arms around his neck. The waitress from the Aldrich was dead. In her place stood the undisputed queen of the Chicago syndicate, bound by blood, loyalty, and a love forged in absolute fire. Did Marlowe make the right choice, staying with a ruthless kingpin, or is she just dancing with the devil in a gilded cage? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If this mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding stories. See you in the next one.